Hey, it's Cole from Cole's Quilts, and I'm going to start the Sew Along Baby Dragon baby quilt pattern today. I've decided to do this quilt in 5-inch blocks. I normally do larger blocks, but since it's a baby quilt, one of the advantages of the smaller blocks is that when we get to the more complex area of the dragon, you'll have less to deal with at once, which will be nice. So I tried to squish the 5-inch blocks on one piece of paper because I thought it just felt like a waste of paper. I'm gonna be showing you 2 blocks right now, and I think what I'll do is all the blocks that are like this, I might over time just post them on the website, and then when we get to a block where there's something different, I'll post another video. So these are the first 2 blocks I'm gonna be showing you. One thing I wanna point out is that I have the seam allowance drawn around the outside. It's a little bit cut off, but these are placed so that when you cut in between these 2 blocks, that is exactly in the middle of the paper. So the edge of that paper is gonna be your seam allowance. But we're also gonna use a ruler just to make sure that we've measured it properly. So I have my 2 blocks. I have some of my fabrics. So I have directions on the website that list all the fabrics and give you some basic directions. Most of the fabrics are going to be from the Soft Rainbow Fat Quarter Bundle from Connecting Threads. I just grabbed the 3 that I need for these 2 blocks. I like to label my fabrics with painter's tape so that I can keep track of what I'm calling them. When you get your Fat Quarter Bundle, you get this little card that has all the colors on it. You see it's sort of scribbled on it with Sharpie. So for example, the color might be called 94173, otherwise known as Blue Mist. I'm calling that BM for Blue Mist, or Baby Pink is going to be BP for Baby Pink, so it's easier to fit on there. So that's what I have marked on the fabric. I have marked all of my fabrics so that I know what's what, and then I also have my matching silver thread from Connecting Threads that I'm going to be using to sew. I have pre-cut some of the pieces so it'll be a little bit easier for the video, but you don't necessarily have to do that. The first thing you're gonna do is we're gonna cut this right along the middle to separate the 2 blocks, since I put 2 blocks on paper. And we're gonna start with the most simple block. Now I have some extra paper on the sides. I'm just gonna leave it. I like to trim that at the end. This is gonna be a good intro to foundation paper piecing if you've never done foundation paper piecing, because this is only 2 pieces, so it cannot get more simple than this. The first 2 pieces on a block you are doing, here are some things you need to know. First of all, the side with the printing is not the side you're going to put the fabric on. We're going to be putting the fabric on this side, so that when you are done with the quilt, all this paper with the labels will be on the back of the quilt, and then the front of the quilt will be the other side. Also, if I was sewing fabric over this, I wouldn't be able to see my directions. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to know. Second thing you need to know is, now this only has 2 pieces, but let's say your first 2 pieces, one of the pieces is gonna lay where it's supposed to be. And I like to order mine with letters, but some patterns do with numbers, it doesn't really matter. So I have like A for the first piece, B for the second piece. And so it says A/CR, so that means this is the first piece, and the color is CR, which is this one, which is carnation, okay? And then B, it means that's the second piece, and that's S for silver, which is this color. Okay, so the first piece, you're gonna lay where it shows it here. So you see this rectangle area and it says ACR. So I'm gonna cut a piece that's a little bit bigger than that, and I'm going to lay it over that area on the back, the opposite side that I have the writing on. But the second piece, which is the silver, that's where it's a little bit different. I'm not gonna lay this where the second piece is gonna go. I'm gonna lay this with the right side against the first piece, so I can like line these pieces up. And I wanna be holding it where, and I can kind of look through and see this, see the light through the paper. I wanna make sure that I have 1/4 of an inch of fabric past where that line is. So that line is my seam, that's where I'm gonna sew. So I have the silver with the right side down. I'm gonna sew that seam so that once that seam is done, I can fold it open like this. I am going to line up my fabric, make sure that I have enough space there. Now I know this seems weird, but we're gonna literally sew the paper. So I'm gonna check to make sure that my fabric's lined up. I like to lift it up and sort of look at where it is and compare it to the line, make sure that I have 1/4 of an inch of extra fabric. And then I'm just gonna sew along this line. What a lot of people do at this point to trim this to make sure it's an exact 1/4 of an inch is they fold the paper back and they use a ruler and a rotary cutter to cut that. And you can totally do that. But I usually just trim it with my scissors. And the reason why I trim it with my scissors is because, number one, I feel like I can eyeball 1/4 of an inch pretty well. And number two, I have a whole system where I'm usually doing a lot of blocks at once. My rotary cutter's over there, so I don't want to have to turn to use it. So that's the main reason why I do that. Now that we've trimmed that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna lay this down. We're gonna fold the second piece over and I'm gonna press it. Now I love this tailor's clapper. It gets the seams really nice and flat. And so usually what I'll do is I'll press it and I'll leave the clapper there, and then I'll be sewing a new piece, and then when I'm ready to press a new piece, I'll take that piece and I'll move this one, press the new one, lay that down, and then I'll be ready to sew the next piece on this one. So since we only have 2 pieces in this block, we're almost done. We're gonna have to trim it, but first, I like to baste around the outside to help hold it together a little better. So I like to put it on a really big stitch and stitch in the seam allowance all the way around the block. So I've basted around the block, and the reason why I like to do that is because I feel like it helps hold the fabric all in one place until I sew the blocks together. Once the blocks are sewn together, it doesn't really matter. You will have to pick all this out at the end when you pull the paper out, which is annoying. So you can skip that step, but when we only have 2 pieces here, it helps hold the fabric to the paper, okay? So the last thing we need to do is we need to trim it. Now, some of my patterns don't have this seam allowance drawn on here. And the reason why is because, I'll be honest, I don't think you really need it. Because as long as you have the outline of the block, then what you would do when you're done sewing the block is I'm just gonna use this ruler and I'm going to go to that first line, it's 1/4 of an inch, and I'm gonna line that up with the edge of the block and cut it right along there. So you'll notice it'll line up with where it shows the seam allowances on my paper, but if I didn't have that seam allowance drawn on there, it wouldn't matter because I could just use this ruler. So I just line up the ruler, cut along the ruler. Okay, so this is my first block. Here's the back of it. Notice it says B1, that indicates where it is in the quilt. And then when I flip it over, you can see here's my fabric. Right now it's just 2 pieces. I should have a little bit more fabric right there, to be honest. I was kind of sloppy about that. So I can either redo that or I can just sew on another piece of fabric to make sure that I have enough of the seam allowance. Let's do a block that has just 1 more piece. Okay, so here's our slightly more complex block. The block has 3 pieces. So here's our first piece, it says A, S, that's the silver. Here's our second piece, it says B, BP, that's the baby pink. Our first piece, remember, we're gonna be putting on the opposite side, where it says A, we're gonna be putting that piece, the silver. And then this, the baby pink, instead of it going right here, I'm gonna start with it on top of the other one. So you want the right sides of the fabric together. Gonna line up their edges, and then we're gonna line it up. And I wanna look and make sure that I have enough fabric on all the sides there. And then I'm gonna sew it along the line in between those 2 pieces. I'm gonna double check that it's lined up properly. And again, I would trim this, although I feel like this is pretty good. It's pretty close to 1/4 inch there. And then I'm gonna press it this way. So now I've pressed the baby pink piece out. So when I flip it over, here are my 2 pieces. I can see that the fabric goes out past the seam allowance. And now I gotta do my third piece. The first piece is the only piece where you lay it right away on this section that's labeled for that piece. Everything else, you have to think about where you have to put it so that when you fold it over, it will end up where it's supposed to be. So for this third piece, I need to think, okay, if I'm gonna be sewing it on that seam, where does it need to be so that when it folds out, it ends up right here. So if I flip this over here, this is where it's gonna go. So I need it to start like this so that after I sew it, I can flip it this way. Now I will tell you, if you've never done foundation paper piecing, this will really mess with your head. When I first started, I felt like it just feels backwards. It just feels completely backwards from everything you're used to. So one of the things that I like to do when I think I have it in the right place is I'll put the needle down and then I'll flip this up and I'll look at the fabric here and I'll look at the line and I'll make sure that it's lined up so that it's 1/4 of an inch past that line. And now I'm gonna sew along this line. Now I'm gonna trim, and then I'm gonna press. Now here's my beautiful block. I am going to baste the block, and then we're gonna trim it. Here are our finished blocks, A1 and B1. So this means A is a column, this is the first column, B is the second column, 1 is the row. These are going to be attached here, so when I flip it over, this is what the beginning of the quilt is gonna look like. Very simple right now, but when we get into the dragon, it's gonna start being a lot more complex. If you want to download these blocks and the directions and get started with me, go ahead and go to my website and we'll have it all there for free download. And it will also have information about the fabrics, and probably in about a month or so, I'll post another video. Stay tuned.